Hi guys, today we're doing a tutorial on positioning. I have all the files set up here for you, so if you have a look in position, what I've done here just to set myself up is I open position.html. That's going to be your work file that you're going to do some exercises in or some practice in, and then a readme, which is this file over here, which just goes through the content of what we're going to cover today. So I've opened them and previewed them. That's basically what you see on the screen there. So I'm going to close the File Explorer now for a bit more screen real estate. And we can start. So we're doing positioning. So this lets us position where things appear on the page itself, which is very important. So we've got 5 different position values that we can use: static, relative, fixed, absolute, and sticky. Now, static is the first one, and it's by far the simplest. It is basically the default uh, option. So if you don't put anything, it will assume static. For this reason, you don't actually often see the word static on a page because it's there by default, so people just assume it. And basically, it's saying that the top, right, bottom, left have no properties, no effects on a static element. So static elements are positioned, um, basically they just sit in the flow. And what does that mean? Well, if we have a look here, you can see that our child, we better have a look at our code, I guess. So we've got a very simple setup here in the HTML. Actually, what I've got as well, just so that you know, is I've set up a couple of regions so that I can hide the text because I just want to focus on the HTML. The text is useful later on in the tutorial for scrolling. So I'm just going to hide those or fold them up so we can concentrate on what we need to. So what we've got here is a very simple setup where you've got a parent and a child within the parent, pardon me. And very simple styling as well. You can see a parent, which is the red box. You can see a child, which is the blue box. And what we've done is because the child's in the parent, and because there's no position option here, it is static by default. It's static. I could put position static in here, and it makes no difference because that's the default. So what happens here is that it is just in the flow. So it's in the first available position. So what you'll find is if I put something in the parent, you can see that the first available position now is below the text there. Seem to have broken it somehow. I don't know how. I'll just bring that back. But yeah, you can see that it's in the flow basically. So that is static, very simple, default. You don't really have to worry about it because that's what happens naturally. Let's see what's next up is relative. So we're going to have a look at relative now. Let's go back to our HTML and let's go back to our document. So before we do, actually, let's have a look. So elements with relative position are positioned relative to their normal position in the document flow. You can use top, bottom, left properties to offset from its normal position, but the original space is still reserved. So it's relative to their normal position in the document flow. All right, let's try and work out what that means exactly. First of all, let's get rid of this text here. Let's change this to relative. Okay, so let's see what's going on here. So far, no great change. But what we can do now, according to our preview relative, we can use top, bottom, left, and right. So let us try that. So we can go from the top, let's go 2 centimeters. Notice we're using the unit of centimeters here. So we're going 2 centimeters from the top. And you can see that's basically 2 centimeters from the normal flow of where it sits without any offset here. If we were to put in some text here, then our normal flow would be further down and the blue box goes further down. So this is also not a very complicated one, fairly easy to understand. Just, pardon me, it is, you can put an offset relative to its normal position in a normal flow of the document. And you can see it scrolls normally. And like I say, anything in the parent there will, it'll be offset by stuff before in the parent class, division, sorry. You can also experiment with left, right, so right on, and you can go 1 centimeter. So what that means is that we've pushed it from the right-hand side 1 centimeter, so it's going in the left direction, I guess you would say, from the right. And you can see it's overflowing off the edge of the screen. And interestingly, you can even put negative numbers there. So I could go -1 from the right, in other words, go closer to the right. And you can see that it moves it closer to the right there. So you can play around with those settings there. So let's clean all of that up. We'll take all of this out again, just so that everything's simple. And we'll take this out. And we'll have another look at the next setting. So the next setting was fixed. Okay, fixed isn't too hard. So elements with position fixed are positioned relative to the viewport or the browser window, and they remain in the same place even when the page is scrolled. This is useful for creating navigation bars, headings, or floating elements. So another one that's not too complicated. So we can change this to fixed and have a look at what happens. So let's go back to our document here. And this is why I have all the text there so that I can scroll. And you can see that it's basically floating above the text. So that's can be useful sometimes, as they say, particularly if you want some sort of, navigation bar up the top that doesn't disappear when you scroll your page. So that's fixed. Next up, absolute. Okay, elements with position absolute, and I'll give you a warning, this is the most complicated one, I would say. So elements with position absolute are positioned relative to their nearest positioned, and I'd highlight the word positioned ancestor. We'll go over this. Any ancestor with position other than static, If no positioned ancestor exists, it is positioned relative to the initial containing block, usually the HTML element, or you can think of it as the whole screen. What does all that mean? Well, a demonstration speaks 1,000 words, so let's have a look at this in demo mode. All right, so we've got fixed at the moment. So we will change this to absolute. You'll notice that nothing changes because we haven't put any offsets here. So let's just do a simple top 2 centimeters, for example. Okay, so what are we looking at here? So if we look at the definition again, it says elements are positioned relative to their nearest positioned ancestor. And if there's no positioned ancestor, then it's relative to the HTML element. So because we don't have any positioned ancestor, the ancestor being the parent, so at the moment we're changing the child, the parent here isn't positioned at all, or it's positioned by default by static, and our documentation says, documentation is slow, other than static, right? So any position other than static. So if we have a look, we see that the ancestor doesn't have a position other than static, and so it's defaulting back to the whole HTML file, basically. And so it's 2 centimeters from the top of the page. Now, if we were to go something like position, oops, relative, then you can see straight away our blue box dances down, and that's because the parent is now positioned with something other than static. So it's positioned relative to the parent. So that one's a bit tricky. You can play around with it. Obviously, you can put in right, right, all the same sort of stuff we were doing before. Yeah, so that is position absolute. There's only one more in our list to cover, and that is sticky, which is an interesting one. And elements with position sticky act like relative positioning until they reach a specified scroll position and then they become fixed. Who knows what that means? Once again, it's going to be very clear when we do a demo. So let's just do a demo and be done with it. Let's get rid of position relative there. And let's get rid of that stuff. And let's change this to fixed. And what we should see is when we scroll, it stays in position. So that's what fixed really means. You can also, so as you can see, nothing much happens there. But as soon as we put something like, or you can put 0 centimeters as well, you can see that as soon as it gets to that position, in fact, maybe 0 is better. You can see as soon as it gets to that top position, it stays there. It sticks to whatever position we put here. We can do that for the child as well. So we could take those, Control X. We could put the child there. And when we do that, you can see that what's happening is the child is sticking until it gets to the bottom of its parent, and then it's going off the screen. So quite interesting. So you can experiment with that effect at all. But basically, those are the settings for position. You need to practice them to get used to them, but they are very powerful in terms of helping you position things, particularly side borders or particularly, like top navigation bars, uh, icons on the top left-hand corner of the screen, etc. I'll leave you with your exercises to try. Have fun.